It's good to be with you on what is a really cold Saturday morning when I'm recording this, and I expect it to be cold Sunday as well when most of you will be watching this. It's the last opportunity and reminder, please, just to get back to me if you haven't already, about whether you would be considering attending a 10 o'clock service in the church building as and when we restart them, if we do so in mid-September. It would really help us to hear from you, whatever your plans for that, whether you would want to or whether you would not, because it really will be difficult for us to make clear plans that work for the best for all of us if we don't hear from everybody of different points of view on that. So please do get back to me as soon as you can if you haven't done so already. This morning we're in Daniel chapter 3, and if you have a Bible with you, it'd be great if you could have that open in front of us. And we're continuing this theme of faithful living for God in the midst of alien, difficult, dangerous circumstances. And the focus moves in this chapter to Daniel's friends, specifically Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the part of the world where the people of God have been moved against their will into exile. King Nebuchadnezzar had made this image of gold, an idol, and he was insistent that everybody at a given signal should worship that image as a sign of their dedication to him. And this, of course, is the point of no return, the tipping point for people who wanted to remain faithful to God in this foreign and alien circumstance. The penalty for disobedience was death. They were to be thrown into this blazing furnace, and it becomes apparent that some of God's followers, the Jews as they're referred to in this passage in verse 8, it becomes apparent to the people in power in Nebuchadnezzar's court that these people of God are not bowing down to worship the golden image at the approved sign. And there are some of them who are in positions of responsibility that Nebuchadnezzar has put in charge of provinces. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's three friends particularly. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up, Nebuchadnezzar is told. So, of course, Nebuchadnezzar is incredibly angry. They are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are dragged before him, and they are asked if this is true, and they affirm that it is. They have nothing to hide. The fire is stoked. They are thrown into the fire. The fire is so hot that even some of those around the fire found themselves burned by it. And astonishingly, Nebuchadnezzar, as he waits to see these three men die, sees a fourth person, in his words, walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. We take this now to be a picture of Jesus, the Son of Man, as he's referred to later in the book of Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouts, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." And they're brought out, they are unharmed, and Nebuchadnezzar has this change of heart and says that anybody who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is to suffer. And they are promoted once again in the service of the king. It's a famous story. It's one of those stories that is often read at Sunday school, and it's one that asks us to focus on the difference between the visible and the invisible, the manufactured and the pre-existing, the tangible and the intangible, ultimately and most importantly here, between something that enslaves and something that frees. Everything starts with God, and everything flows from God. And in this incident, the followers of God are challenged to give their devotion to something that hasn't started with God and that doesn't come from God, this golden idol that is a symbol of apparent devotion to Nebuchadnezzar. The point is that this idol can do nothing. It is, in the words that we would read in other places in the Old Testament, a dumb idol. This image made out of gold cannot speak, cannot do anything. All it does is simply demand worship, demand obedience, demand that ritual be fulfilled in this way, at this time, in this place, on pain of death. How different to the worship of God, of our God, where we worship a God who has spoken and who continues to speak, who has shown himself in Jesus, who requires not blind, slavish obedience, but a dialogue, an interaction, a process of presenting our needs before him in prayer and of waiting for his word to us. Our God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in this passage, is not dumb, but this is a God who speaks. He doesn't do nothing, but he is a God who acts. He doesn't require slavish obedience, he requires faith that flows from an understanding of everything that God does and has done already. And one of the interesting thing that I really want us to focus on this morning is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not pin their faith to a certain outcome. Here they are dragged before Nebuchadnezzar, who is blazingly angry and is going to put them to death. And here is what they say to him. Remember, they are on trial for their life. King Nebuchadnezzar, verse 16 of Daniel 3, "We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Notice they have this conviction. They really do believe that God will deliver them. But they don't pin their faith to that. There seems for them to be an understanding that they don't understand everything, if that makes sense to you. They seem to get that they can't control the outcome of this situation. But that even if it doesn't go the way they think it will go and the way they want it to go, of course, that they will survive, it doesn't mean that God isn't who he says he is. It doesn't mean that God isn't good. It means there's something else going on. Notice this is subtly different from saying that God has a plan even if things go disastrously wrong. It's not that kind of pious, easy, it's all going to be all right sort of thinking. It's a more rugged, a more determined, a more realistic conviction that even if the worst happens, God is still God. We're not going to serve your gods even if he doesn't deliver us, say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their faith doesn't depend on a certain answer. And that, I think, it seems, is one of the fundamental differences between the true God and an idol. An idol is something we as people define for ourselves. An idol is something that we say, this is God because this is how I want God to be. But the true God is the God who says, this is who I am. Nothing to do with who you want me to be or who you think I might be. I am who I am, as God has his title in other places in the Bible. An idol can be anything. In theory, we know this, but it's much harder to identify an idol in our lives than it is for us to identify an idol in other people. An idol is anything that comes from us that attempts to define, encapsulate, sum up God, attach our faith to, that doesn't start with God. Idolatry could be to say, this happening will show that God is real no matter what. Idolatry could be to pin our faith on a certain hoped for, longed for, expected answer to prayer. Because if God doesn't answer this prayer the way I want it answered, he doesn't exist at all. What we're doing when we have that sort of faith is saying God has to be the God I want him to be, or he can't exist. Whereas God is who he is. So prayer for the faithful follower of God becomes the humble placing of our needs before him, not the desperate and almost arrogant attaching of our own agenda to our definition of God. Of course, we can repeatedly and in desperation place very urgent needs before God. But what the trap we need to guard against for ourselves is not linking any one thing, any one outcome, any one manifestation of God to our conviction that God is real and there. At the end of the day, faith is faith. Our God, we cannot see him physically, although he has been revealed physically in Jesus. And because we cannot see him physically, he requires faith to believe in him. That's a logical statement. A visible God, an idol, that is attached to our own definition of who God is, doesn't require faith, but actually requires this kind of slavish obedience that we worship him in this certain way to get a certain result so that we feel a certain way. That's not freedom, that's manipulation and exploitation of us. Even if it can start with us, we end up being manipulated and exploited. The true, to us currently invisible God, yes, requires us to work and asks us to pray, but not in a way that resignedly accepts the status quo. It requires a lifestyle that is free but focused. A visible idolatrous God requires a tick-box checklist of performance-based religion, which is tempting because it can make us feel good ourselves as we tick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 off the list. It's tempting, but it's ultimately burdensome, because what if there's another thing we haven't done? But the freeing, apparently invisible God revealed in Jesus, who we worship and who is present in the fire in that fourth person, doesn't attach anything about him to one particular outcome of a prayer or a situation. It's that God is God. I am who I am. He is who he is. Yet though he slay me, as Job had it, I will still trust in him. Idolatry can also lead us to try and subtly protect God in some way, to make out we're blessed when we're struggling. Because if we were to admit we're struggling, then that would somehow be a criticism of God. To say we're happy when life is tough and sad, to say we're okay when we're not, because to admit the opposite would feel like we're betraying God, betraying an actually idolatrous image of him. But we wouldn't be betraying him, because to honestly represent how things are and how we are is to then to continue to choose to live faithfully, which is what God wants from us, not the pretense that we're okay when life isn't. Faithfulness makes space for petition, for begging, for asking things from God, and it makes space for lament, saying, this is awful, this is desperate, we need your help. Idolatry refuses those things. It just says, do as I do as I tell you to do. And we see all of this in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They don't need vindication or proof to have themselves shown to be right. They know that their God, our God, is satisfied with faithfulness, not the apparent outcome of success, because that's what God is satisfied with. We see that in Jesus. Well done, good and faithful servant. They, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would have been at peace with the idea of dying here, going down in the eyes of so many as apparent failures. Idolatry would have said, if we're not alive at the end of this, then God isn't God. God must be the God who does the miraculous in this instance here and now. Again, it doesn't mean we don't ask for the miraculous, ask for the big thing, but we don't attach our faith to one outcome. Faithfulness to the true God as opposed to the idol that we create is humble obedience and trust, no matter the outcome. It's being in it for the long haul rather than the quick answer. Where are you? Where are we? Where am I with this today? Is there something that we have attached our understanding of God to in such a way that if it doesn't prove to be true, then God will no longer be God for us? Or are we, as we present our laments and our petitions and our needs and our hopes and our fears to God, are we at the end of the day content enough to let God be who God says he is? I am who I am.